Welcome to the Note Investor Podcast. We'll guide you through the ups and downs of note investing and teach you all about the nitty-gritty details of the business that other people won't talk about. Your host, Dan Deppen, is a former aerospace engineer and product manager who transitioned away from cubicle life to full-time note investing in 2018. Our website is www.fusionnotes.com, where you can subscribe to this podcast, comment, and find links to other information on note investing.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Note Investor Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Deppen, and today I'm joined by Wayne Snell, Chief Investment Officer of Crowd Capital. Wayne, how you doing?
Great, Dan. How you been?
Good. So I'm so glad to have you on. You're one of the first guys I met in the note business when I started about 5 years ago, and I think you've been at it for 10 years plus. So kind of
Yeah, it's
looking
over a
forward to
decade at this
hear,
point. Yeah.
yeah, some of your story and kind of get into what you're doing now.
Great. Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So hi, everybody. I was just talking to Dan before we started that it's been over a decade now since I started in the note business. I'm a tech guy at heart. We were kind of sharing war stories on technology companies. And Crowd Capital, what I'm doing now is a hybrid organization. It is a technology company and a notes business. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that, but maybe I'll share some war stories as well and some lessons along the way that I picked up over the last decade.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, kind of interested in hearing some war stories and how you've seen like the notes business evolve, and maybe talk about like some of how your strategies have evolved over
Well, I
time.
guess maybe I'll start there. Yeah. So in for the last 10 years, well, actually, no, for the last year and a half, I've been doing Crowd Capital now. So really for the last 12 years at this point, I focused my notes business first as I called it a hobby. I was in the full-time job as a technology VP of marketing for a software company in Dallas area. And I just was working 80, 90 hours a week and kind of missing out on some of my son's most important activities, the football games, the after school, the plays, those kind of things. And I was realizing that I needed a passive income approach. And for those of you who may have heard my story in the past, sorry for kind of boring you there, but the goal was at the time I was married. We had this idea that we would get some passive income to replace at least her income first, and then hopefully mine over time. And so we were really gung ho on rental properties at the time. This was back in early 2000s, and we bought quite a few of them. But one of the challenges I was faced with and why I got involved in notes is, well, two things. One is tenants suck for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Even the best of them still screw up your house, and it's not even intentional, but they do. And so you have vacancies, and that eats into your revenue. I had a house burned down. I had a house where a tree fell through it. I mean, all sorts of things. And, insurance companies are hard to work with. And we were in a networking group where the plan was if you can roll all of your single family rentals into a multifamily, then you can kind of get better economies of scale. So I was trying to do that and couldn't pick up enough of the rentals. I only had about 15. And the goal is you really get to about 20 to 25. So I was at a Dallas-based networking event where somebody said, you know what you ought to do? Go buy a mortgage, somebody that's not paying for their house. And you can get those, and then you can foreclose on them, and you get in front of those fix and flippers and the wholesalers, and you get your houses. And so I started researching it, and I said, wait a minute, what if I don't foreclose on these people and I just get them to start paying me again? Then I don't have the problem of the tenants trashing toilets, and at the same time, I get my passive income. So that's what started. I bought my first note in 2011. I believe it was.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What was it like
at this
buying
time,
back then?
Because for one thing, it was a hell of a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
In those days, you could buy at 25, 30 cents on the dollar for an unpaid balance. But it was also the Wild West. Nobody did any due diligence back then. I didn't even know what I was doing. I just kind of threw stuff against the wall and it stuck. And sometimes I screwed it up, but I was using my own money, so I didn't necessarily worry about it, because I also had the cash flow coming in from the rental properties at that time. Um, if I compare then versus even 5 years ago, the prices continue to go up as more and more people got involved with non-performing mortgages, which was my specialty. And the prices went from 30 cents on the dollar up to 50 and sometimes 60 cents on the dollar. I also started taking in investor capital under joint venture agreements. And that's something I don't do anymore. I'm just going to start there. But the reason I was doing them was, hey, I have an expertise that you don't have. If you will put up the money to purchase the note and do the workout costs, I will do all the work for you, and then we will split the profits 50-50. Just around 2017, it became apparent that that model was getting scrutinized by the SEC because there were some people out there that were just doing bad things, taking their money and not paying. And anybody, I just recommend you can Google anybody and you can find on your own who those people might be. However, my attorneys recommended you should stop doing joint ventures. And I was in a lot of them. At my heyday, I had over 300 notes with my former company. In 2020, I met a gentleman, Christian Rotter, who had come up with an idea that I thought was pretty cool, which is, hey, you do really well at notes and non-performing notes, and you obviously have a social agenda where you're trying to help people keep their house whenever possible, and that is my mission. I don't believe in foreclosing unless there's no other way. He wanted to take that concept and automate a lot of the processes through a technology. Now, for those of you who know, I mentioned I was in the technology companies. Well, what I didn't say is I started my career in the early 80s as a software guy, and I pretty much did that up until 2016 full time. So I'm deep in tech, all the way from the IBM mainframes to the more recent cloud-based. So when he came to me with this idea, I said, it would be really cool. Let me do some research and look into what we can build here. And that's what essentially built Crowd Capital. So which is what I'm doing now. So I'm the chief investment officer for the notes side of the business. I'll talk about that in a second. But Crowd Capital is a technology company. We've built a software that empowers borrowers through a digital platform to afford their monthly payments and to get them back on track to improve their financial health. So help them avoid foreclosures. And we do that through software. And they don't even realize it's software, right? They think it's people helping them and things like that. So
yeah, I was going to ask how that works, because I know like a lot of my borrowers, especially on non-performing ones, they're not always super tech savvy. Like I've had people had to go to the library to use a computer and things like that.
That's exactly true. So we've made it mobile first. So everybody's got one of these things in their hand, and it's very much built to interact with them. We first focused on the loan modification process because obviously that's the piece that we think will help families who are about to lose their house, are more likely to jump through the hoop to keep their house. And so we're seeing that to be true. We've got servicers using it. We've got borrowers on the platform. We've gotten payments through with the modifications. So it's still early stage. We still have a lot of work to do, but at least the application is doing what we thought it would do, and we're eating our own dog food. If you're familiar with that phrase, where I have created a fund, which is a social impact fund around non-performing notes. So I have investors that have invested in our fund, the Crowd Capital Fund, and we're using the software to automate the processes that I just talked about. So we're buying non-performing notes, and we're super, super picky about what those look like. A lot more picky than I was back in my old company days, because we want to collect the data that we can then show the loan servicers that we're targeting with this software that, look, we're doing it ourselves. We're using that. We are seeing these success rates, and it's early on. So we're still measuring and we're still tweaking. But from the fund perspective, the goal is you don't have to, for investors, it's all about helping people, but also making profits at the same time. So we are a for-profit fund where they're not
A
making money.
nonprofit, or
Yeah, we are certainly for-profit. And therefore, if I have to foreclose, I will, but that is our final and last resort. We have a lot of different strings we can pull to help the family out.
So are
So
you
that's kind
still
of what I'm
using
to.
loan servicers, or is your
Oh yeah,
software
yeah,
handling this?
yeah.
Okay.
And quite frankly, the reason is manyfold. One is we still want to, we're required to comply with all the CFPB rules and the local state laws and things like that. Like I just literally went through the process of, we bought our first loan in South Carolina the other day, which I'm shocked by it took so long, but it's a pain in the butt to get registered in South Carolina. So you got to
Yeah.
do all the state. It requires certificate of authority. I'll eventually spit that out correctly, which then means you need a registered agent in that state. And since we are a Delaware company, then we had to get one of those. And then that costs some money. And of course, it's money here, money here, money here. Next thing you know, there's filing a tax return, even though there's no taxes yet. It's pretty amazing the amount of work that has to happen. So we are working with loan servicers. We also want to use our software as a lever to get into more servicers, to show them the benefits that they could receive. Specifically, the goal is to help families over time improve their financial health. I call it guided big brothering, right?
Mm-hmm.
We know everything about them because they're paying their mortgage. We during our modification process, we also talk to them about certain activities that they may not necessarily want to continue. Like if you guys got super amounts of credit card debt, one of the things that we recommend is that they work with a HUD certified loan counseling or essentially financial counselors to get on a family budget. And by doing that, that really does help them understand how much money's going out the door. Our goal is to avoid future foreclosures and future defaults. So if we can help them look at their finances as part of our software process, we can say, a little tweaking here and there. We know that you are more likely to start saving some money, so you will avoid the next issue when, God forbid, we have another pandemic or whatever hell happens. There's a lot to it that I don't want to get into here, but you guys, if you're interested, you can go look at our website and take a look at that. It's crowdcapital.io. Got to be cool with the IO. Right?
Yeah. How receptive are most borrowers like to that? I know like some of my borrowers, like the whole concept of budgeting and whatnot is can be kind of.
Well, like I said, we're pretty picky about who we're buying in the first place. It's, you want to keep your house? We got a solution for you. But, not everybody's going to do it. We know that. And there's a lot, but this is I call it the happy path, right? Somebody who's really focused on keeping their home. There's a lot of research out there that people that lose their house generally fall into worse habits, drugs. They're more hospitalized, more likely to have heart attacks. The kids drop out of school, become the next generation of illiterates, things like that. So anything we can do to help the family, and specifically, there's a terminology that Freddie Mac uses called fallout, and it just seems to be that minorities and lower income people are more likely to have the problem, and they are not as well served as other communities. So I actually target purchasing those mortgages to try and help them because we figure it's a better way to give them a leg up. And improve, we're also looking to help them with financial literacy. That's not there yet, but teaching people is not really my job, but it helps. When they see the value of it, it makes a lot of sense. Hey guys, if you're leasing 2 cars for $1,700 a month, but you can't pay your $600 mortgage, we got a problem, right?
Yeah.
So it's just teaching them that without a place to live, nothing else really matters. But you also need a job, and you also need a car to get to the job. So we understand that you probably don't need the 7th TV, those kind of things. If you're putting your child through private school, but you can't feed yourselves, it's also another problem. So we try and look at course correcting whenever possible. And that's what we're focused on. So back to the fund is taking that through the process with the idea that we are reperforming loans, which is what everybody's goal, right, is, and then paying our investors returns on the interest as it's collected. And then when we have seasoned those loans for the good old 18 months to 24 months and resell them to cash flow investors who look for good performing yields, then we rinse and repeat. And so the fund kind of keeps going on its own. It's a 5-year fund. We don't want to have to do a fire sale at the end like I've seen a lot of other funds do.
Yeah, that's where I've gotten some of my best deals.
Exactly.
It's when a fund is shutting down and they're having to sell. Yeah, that's always nice as a fire. Yeah.
I'm hoping, knock on wood, we don't have that problem. We're really pretty targeted about that. Our investors are getting a hurdle rate, and then we've told them we will stop buying mortgages at month 32. So that we have essentially the rest of the period of time to work through the process in case we do have to foreclose or season loans. There's less social solutions that still help a family, like the deed in lieu or authorizing a short sale. I can authorize a short sale in about a week, where the good old Citibanks of the world, not to pick on them, but it takes them a year plus to get one of those approved, and by then the process is a lot worse for the family.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's one of the advantages of being small, is you can just make decisions,
right,
and go quickly. Like, I know I've talked to borrowers who sometimes were in bad situations and wanted to get things worked out, but their loan was owned by some larger institution and they just couldn't even get anybody on the phone.
Well, that's actually why we built Thrive. Sorry, our product is called Thrive. So we don't want them just to subside. We want them to thrive. That's what we call it. But that's why we built Thrive, because one of the things about the loan modification process is just the morass and the, hey, send me these 52 pages of handwritten documents. And then they mail them in, or maybe they fax them. And then, hey, I didn't get page 42. More often than not, the servicer doesn't even tell them they didn't get page 42 till they call in a week or two later and go, hey, I hadn't heard anything. Right. And so there's this long process, and all of this is automated with us through the technology. So, and it's a human element, right? So it's not, they talk to the same person over and over, right? Even though it's technology assisted, it's not at the expense of human touch points. So that's why we think the servicers benefit from it, because it allows their service team, we call them borrower relationship managers, BRMs, but allows their servicing team to handle more people at the same time, because a lot of the stuff is automated, as opposed to scaling up employees. They can be more efficient and get better returns on their employees.
No, that's very cool. I've often, like I said, I think throughout just the real estate business in general, we're talking about real estate or mortgages or title. I don't want to get on a rant, but it seems like there's all these 100-year-old manual processes that make no sense. And, there are all these industries that are just begging for somebody to come in and do what like Uber did to cab companies, or, something like that. So it sounds like you're kind of carving out.
Yeah, and I don't want to jinx it, because there are companies that have started automating the loan origination process. And that's great, but nobody seems to be focused on the back office ones. And quite frankly, everybody knows everything about a borrower when they're originating a loan, right? Their income, their credit score, where they live, their family, you probably know when they went to the bathroom last. But as soon as that mortgage is given to them and they start paying, nobody pays any more attention to them, really. And so our goal is to pay attention to them and actually proactively understand when things might occur to have them go delinquent. And before that happens, course correct. So enough of that. I know we spent a lot of time on that. I do want to say a few things about some war stories. I actually, one thing I just wanted to talk about was, I mentioned I'm super picky about buying those non-performing mortgages in the first place. For our fund, that's 20 states. It's easier to tell the ones that don't. We are pretty specific. I don't care if they're judicial states or non-judicial states. I do care if they're more, I don't want them to be states that are lender friendly, and therefore the court systems are going to be overly preventive for having a stick when needed.
So you're
I'll
talking
leave it
about
at
staying
that.
away from like the New Yorks of the world and
Yeah, I do stay away from New York because even though upstate New York isn't as bad as like the boroughs, for those of you who've experienced this, I've actually been told that even now it still takes 7+ years to get a good foreclosure done if you need to. And there are instances in Brooklyn where some of these $1 million brownstones, people have been living them for free for 10 years and there's nothing you could do about it. I don't believe that's fair. I don't believe it's right, and I won't help that. So we don't invest in the Northeast for the most part, which is funny because that's where I live. But what we do is we spend a lot of time looking at the criteria. For example, I want a single family house that's owner occupied, and it has to be a first lien mortgage, not a contract for deed. And that's specifically for my fund because we don't want to own the property and be responsible for it. I want to talk about due diligence in general. In the past, I mentioned it was a Wild West environment. There were times when I would literally talk to a person at a conference. They'd be like, "Hey, I got a tape. You interested?" "Yeah." "All right." I'd take a look at it and I'd wire funds to them and then, figure it out from there. And those days are long gone, my friends, because there are people who will take advantage of you everywhere you can. They can. And unfortunately, that's just true. So I do recommend, if you're going to do notes, you do a lot of due diligence. The first thing is, don't trust the seller when they say, "Hey, the BPO value is here and the assignment chain is intact," and so on and so forth. Do your own due diligence. There's a lot of great companies out there. You can buy broker price opinions. I work with a couple of them. I don't know if I should mention, but because it's not fair to the ones I don't work with. But you should always order one. And if, when in doubt, order two. It's worth $200 to not lose 20,000 in my mind.
Yeah, I've done that before, and I've sometimes gotten wildly different values.
Oh yeah,
back.
absolutely. Yeah. I just was negotiating with somebody yesterday. They told me, "Oh, my broker price opinion on this this property, it's up in Michigan, was $80,000." I'm like, "Why did mine come in at 55?" That's a slightly different disparate. I mean, if it was 10,000, maybe I could talk about it. But we're talking $35,000 differences.
Yeah.
So you want to do your homework. You also want to check the title. And it's worth the extra couple days and cost to have the city liens, sewer liens, and water liens looked into, because those are the ones that can get you. And so I say, trust nobody. Similarly, if somebody says you need to wire funds to me today, don't do it.
That sounds like a massive red flag.
Well, it is a massive red flag. This is a good point. But in the old days, we did it. I mean, that's why I always say that. It never even occurred to me until I had money sold, right? There are people out there who just take your money and run. And unfortunately, you don't learn that until it's happened. So I say use an escrow agent. That could be your attorney. That could be a title company. If you're working with if you're using one of the auction sites like PaperStack, or they're the escrow agent, so they handle it for you. And I like PaperStack, not to endorse them over anybody else. There's a lot of great systems out there. I just happened to work with them yesterday. So I'm thinking about doing deep due diligence means that you do send the loan documents off to a third-party reviewer to make sure that what you think you see is what you really see. You can have an attorney do that. You can have document custodians do that. I also recommend that unless you have a fireproof safe and you're going to get a bunch of notes, you should send your physical loan documents to a custodian to store them. Like they digitize them for you. They keep them safe. You know where they are. If you need to send them to an attorney, it's worth the FedEx cost to do that versus keeping it in your house. One loan, maybe 20 loans. It starts getting big. You start getting into the 200 or 300s like I had. It was impossible for me to have those documents in the house.
Yeah, that sounds difficult to manage. You need a big fireproof safe, and I've looked at those before. They're expensive. Yeah.
Not only that, do they really work? Who knows? I don't want to find out that I just lost 30, 50, 100, 200 mortgages if something happens.
Well, they work if you close it and seal it up, right?
Good
But yeah,
point.
are you always going to do that? Yeah, that's
You're right. And I, I'm generally a lazy person. Um, I do a lot of things good, but one of them is I know that my weaknesses are I'm lazy. Um, so stuff stacked on the table might happen. So just don't even put yourself in that position. Yeah. So some war stories. As I was winding down my old company, first of all, I mentioned I had at the heyday I had 300 notes. Back at the beginning of the pandemic, I still had about 150. Um, Almost all of them were performing. And as you can imagine, investors were getting a little skittish because God only knows what's going to happen and how long this is going to happen. And borrowers were starting to, use the opportunity to, whether they needed it, and many did, or didn't need it but still knew they didn't have to pay. That was a completely different conversation. So I was very lucky. Actually, most of my borrowers continued paying, and my loan servicers came to me. And I, at the time, I still was using 3 different loan servicers. They were like, "Hey, the federal government's offering forbearance and so on." I'm like, "I don't have to. I will, on a case by case basis, analyze the people, and if they can show us that they have true financial hardship, yeah, okay, makes sense. I don't want to put anybody in a burden. I don't want to kick somebody out of their house. And quite frankly, if somebody was paying me for a year and a half, 2 years, I get it. We're gonna figure out a way to keep them going. But there were
Mhm.
people who literally, had a full income who still didn't pay because they didn't have to. So anyway, back in those days, some of my investors were a little concerned. So we did sell off a bunch of the portfolio. And as I mentioned, I started getting more and more involved and then physically became a co-founder and employee of Crowd Capital in 2020. So just as the pandemic was hitting, it made sense to not have a conflict of interest.
Mhm.
Forgot where I was going with that. So
Yeah, well, I know when the pandemic hit, I was in a similar spot where I was really concerned. I was like, okay, I really need to buckle down. But I was pleasantly surprised how borrowers held in there. I did have some of that where people stopped paying maybe because they thought they could, but like overall, I didn't see things crater the way that I
right,
expected
yeah.
at the beginning. So,
So at the beginning of January 2020, I still had 151 or two loans, I think it was. I only had a dozen stop paying. And
mhm.
by the time May rolled around, and even those of the dozen, I think only 2 or 3 missed more than 3 payments. And
Mhm.
they specifically gave us examples of why they were, their service economy for the most part impacted. Most of them were in Indianapolis, of all places, which is just a weird thing that they
Hmm.
seem to all be in the same area. So I don't know if that place was a higher concentration of service employees or not. But the minute they could pay, they did. I mean, it was really interesting. They called up like, "Hey, we're going to pay." Great. So I feel like if you treat people well, they treat you back as well as possible. There was a point of all that, but I think it was just that at the time. War story, right? Sorry.
Yeah.
So one of my notes, it actually predated the pandemic, and it was in Georgia. I won't say too specifically where. The history was I bought a note from a broker. The person was non-performing. They had gotten I think it's called a 401(b) loan, but it's from HUD, and what it is it's a loan that allows you to rehab the house. So it gives you,
Uh-huh.
it's kind of like what we used to do in a rental place where we get hard money loans that were bigger than what we needed to buy it so we could fix it up. Same kind of process. Government uh, provided this loan. Person made a couple payments and then stopped, and the house was at least halfway um, updated, but not all the way through. So I bought that thing in 2016, I believe. Tried to work it out with the borrower. I was using a third party loss mitigation firm on the West Coast. They talked to her quite regularly. She refused, just point blank, "I'm not paying you guys. I don't think I need to. I don't want to."
Yeah.
Um, Happened to know that she had a very good job, well paying, head nurse at a hospital. So,
Oh,
no
wow.
slack. with a large 401k, which we learned. So we're like, all you have to do is tap into your 401k. Nope, not going to do it. That's my retirement. You can't take my house. So I did. And she filed bankruptcy, but she never did anything with a bankruptcy. So I got relief from stay. And the story goes like this, and this is where it gets interesting. So the trustee connected with my attorney, who connected with the judge because she got a better job at a bigger hospital, and was making like double the salary, and asked, hey, if I pay all their legal costs, you think you can convince them to sell them back the house? And my attorney approached me with that. And I'm like, I'm a good guy. Why not? All right, we'll sell them back the house. You pay all my legal fees, which was like 12 grand. She did. She wrote a check. We got the money in. I did a new mortgage. Seller financed it. Went through, call the underwriter. Oh, shoot. Sorry, a firm that does.
No, that's okay.
good.
I've had them on here before.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Really like those guys, by the way. They do great work. And then again, this is years ago. So boarded it. She made one payment and stopped paying again. So now we're into 2000, and I think it was like early 2019. And for whatever reason, because she was in this bankruptcy world, she was able to get me, kind of buy herself some time. And I finally reforeclosed, and I got judgment on, and I remember this vividly, January 4th, 2020. Okay. But in the state of Georgia, you cannot evict without a separate hearing. So the judge scheduled a hearing for mid-February to evict her. But the judge got this mysterious flu, and postponed all his cases to the end of March. So I was pushed back in the eviction process until March. And then, of course, the foreclosure moratorium kicked in, because that's when we figured out it was COVID. I'm sure the judge got it. Who knows? And so she stayed in that house for free, mind you, until the middle of 2021, when, at least in Georgia, we were able to convince the judge that we could proceed with the eviction. So she pretty much lived in that house for almost 3.5 years for free, and made 2 payments, right?
Yeah.
She did pay me back my original legal fees, but I lost them when I had to reforeclose. And I was super pissed off about the whole thing. But there's a silver lining to all this, because by the time the foreclosure moratoriums ended and then the evictions moratorium ended, we were in that superheated
Property values were
sorry, I forgot to mention.
Yeah.
I had the deed to the property on January 4th of 2020, right? So it was my responsibility to pay the taxes, my responsibility to pay the insurance, and she's living in this house for free. When I finally did get her out, the sheriff literally said, I'm really she's a problem in the community. So the sheriff actually was very happy to evict her for me. And we had to do some rehab work. So I finally sold that house so I think it was November 2021 or ish. And I almost doubled my money because of the superheated market. So there was a silver lining. Don't give up. Sometimes this stuff works out for the best.
Yeah, and it's funny, right? So she lived rent free for a couple years, but she missed out on all that equity, and she's got a bankruptcy. So she didn't really come out ahead at all.
No, she didn't. And she must have had something wrong too, because I was told during the day that the sheriff and my moving crew was removing her things. Some family members showed up, and that was the first inkling that they had that she was in trouble. Like, she never asked for help or told them or anything like that. So I feel bad about that. But
yeah,
I also believe that I give everybody as many shots as possible, but at some point, I am a for-profit business.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I talk about modifying. I had 247 modifications. So pretty proud of that. That's 3 times the national average. If you just look at, and more importantly, when I would season those loans and I resold them as cash flowing properties later on, there was very little fallout. And that's the important piece. That's why the fund is so important, because I just wanted to scale that up and see how many families we can actually help.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, it's probably a good stopping point for right now. Wayne, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Always
a really interesting story about doubling your money on the borrower that didn't pay for years.
Yeah. Yeah, it is good. Hey, so just one last thing, and if it's okay, I just wanted to
Yeah.
kind of give myself a slight plug. You guys, if you're interested in learning about the technology organization, we are doing we're raising capital through a crowdsourcing fund called WeFunder, wefunder.com. You can check us out at wefunder.com/crowd capital, all one word. And then, you can take a look and see if it makes sense. Love to have you answer any questions or ask any questions of me if you do.
That sounds great. And I'll put all that information on in the show notes so we can sync up
Great.
after this and you get me all the links. I'll put them in so people can find you. So cool. Well, thanks again. I'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, guys.